this thing's nimble. What is going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Yammy Noob. Thanks so much for joining me today. Oh, it's going to be a special one. In case you missed it, this is our brand new expert bike giveaway bike. Yeah, it's a Panigale V2, bright, flashy Ducati. In case you missed it, go to yammynoob.co, find out how you can get entered to win this Panigale V2. I'm giving it away for free. You can also go to yammynoobmerch.com, get entered there. It's going to be awesome. But today, we are doing my very first ride and impression of this very fine motorcycle from Italy. There's a lot to say about this bike, to be honest. It's not the traditional big bad super bike. It's also been bumped up in displacement over the years. There's a lot to discuss and unpack with this motorcycle. I think it fits in a really unique place in the market right now, and I personally think, spoiler alert, it's the Panigale to get. I think this makes a ton of sense, and personally, I've been super excited about the V2 ever since it was released and announced. So let's give a quick overview of this motorcycle before we take off on the road with it. This is a 955cc V-twin, and don't at me with that L-twin garbage. It says it right there. V2. It's a V. It's confirmed. Done. Don't want to hear it anymore. 160 horsepower, about 77 foot-pounds of torque. As you can tell, it is a proper super sport, super bike committed ergonomics package. You got low bars, high seat, high pegs for that attack position, whether on your favorite back road or the track. This is definitely a track-oriented motorcycle. For 2020, this is basically a 959 that's been changed a little bit and breathed upon by the fine people over at Ducati. It now features, once again, the signature single-sided swing arm. This is a classic Ducati touch on their sport bikes, and it was sorely missing from the 959. They had the weird double-sided swing arm thing. Then for Europe, they had the crazy two cans or whatever, but now they went back to the single-sided swing arm. And you can tell as well that they've updated the looks to be more in line with the V4. So honestly, unless you're looking for winglets or something like that, this is your bright, shiny red Ducati. It looks every bit the part. And in my opinion, it's the classic Ducati sound and style. It's the V-twin. It's the burbly, barky, low-end, grunty V-twin thing that Ducati's been doing for decades now. And with that refresh of the skin of the V4, you get the updated electronics package too from the V4. And so that's why this bike is a little bit unique in that it's got the 955. It's been bumped up in horsepower a little bit, but it's got the full suite of electronics in it. It's got the full bananas, slide control, wheelie control, traction control, sport modes, rider mode, all the cool stuff that you'd want out of a modern day super bike. But in a package, it's a little bit more approachable for someone that maybe doesn't want a absolutely manic 200 plus horsepower sport bike. So let's get this thing started up. I've got a lot to say about this machine, about its place in the world, about what kind of motorcycle it is, and why I personally think it is the Ducati to get. So let's get it started. Let's get it going. We've got a great route planned today. We're going to be doing a little bit of highway, seeing its highway manners. We're going to be taking it on a nice bit of twisty hill country road, and then getting it out in the urban environment because I'm a masochist. So let's get this thing started up. Full TFT display here from the V4. This is the same Ducati display we've seen on the Hypermotard and the V4 on all the super high-end bikes that they make now. So let's get it started here. Comes to life. It's got a total of 19 miles on it, which is not a whole lot. You get that classic Ducati sound. Let's get a quick rev. It's a good one. It's a very, very good one. All right, so we're going to dive into the electronics and stuff at the end of this video. I think what you guys are here for is my first impression ride on it. So we've got it in sport mode. We've got all the electronics as bone stock standard as they come. We haven't dived in and changed stuff because today it's all about just the feel and impression. We're not going to be chasing lap times or testing its on-limit performance. That will come later on. I am 100% getting this thing out on track. But first thing I want to say is, sitting here on the Panigale V2, the first thing you notice is how narrow it is. This bike is so narrow given its V-twin layout. You got one cylinder here and one cylinder here firing away, doing their thing. So that allows Ducati to make this motorcycle very compact. This thing literally feels about as wide as my RC390, guys. I'm not kidding. It's super, super compact. The other thing I noticed as well is Ducati set up the bars nice and wide. I love that. That's probably going to be great on track, and that's something that I highly recommend most beginner riders at the track to do, is to set their bars a little bit wider so you get more leverage when you're full lean, and it's a little bit easier to just chuck it over to its side. The other thing I'm noticing too is the triple clamp is actually quite high in the forks. This motorcycle features fully adjustable suspension, Showas up front, and a Sachs rear end. But the thing I'm noticing is how high up this is right here. Normally you see manufacturers shove their forks way up and the triple clamp way down, so that you get a super agile, nimble feeling on the street, but a lot of twitchiness mid-corner. But it's interesting to see that Ducati has not done that. So let's get this thing in first, and let's take off, shall we? So the first thing I'm feeling is the clutch and throttle actuation is a little funny to me. I'm not a huge fan of super electronically capable motorcycles typically. I find that unless they do something really, really right, they tend to get the throttle and all that kind of wrong, to be honest. So that's definitely something I'm feeling right here. All right, let's feel about this power, shall we? Great in sport mode, man. Feels really, really good. It's got a up and down quick shifter, as you see here. We're splipping down those gears, nice and easy to actuate. The power comes on really velvety smooth on this thing. The Ducati V-twins are known for their nice bottom end grunt, kind of velvety smooth power down low, and this one is tuned to be pretty aggressive up top as well. 160 horsepower is pretty stout. I think, you know, we're going to talk a little bit more about competitors and price points on this thing, but, you know, I think a lot of folks look at something like the V2 and they're like, oh man, it's not fast enough, you know, it doesn't have enough horsepower, it's only quote unquote got 160 horsepower, but guys, that is plenty to have a lot of fun on your motorcycle. So in case you're new to the kind of Ducati Panigale, big Panigale, little Panigale whole thing, let me give you a quick rundown. So back in the mid-90s, Ducati started making their big brother and little brother superbike variants of each other, starting with the 748. So that's this bike's sort of grandfather. It was the original 748. Very pretty motorcycle, quite a nice thing to look at and to ride. That ran for quite some time until they released the 749, and then the much lauded 848, which was a classic Ducati. Lots of people still really, really like those, and they can still be seen at track days ripping it up. Then you had the 899, which started introducing some of that kind of hawk front end Panigale design aesthetic and language. And then you had the 959, which was the upgrade to the 898. And now you have this, which is still basically a 959, but with a lot of key upgrades, as I mentioned. So it's been almost 30 years of Ducati doing this big Panigale, little Panigale thing. And it's funny how now the little Panigale, the little superbike, is a 955cc making 160 horsepower. That is pretty ridiculous, in my opinion, for them to consider that the little Panigale. But hey, that's where we are nowadays. But I'm gonna try to make the case for you in this video that power really isn't everything, guys. So let's talk price. The thing comes at the showroom floor at $16,500, and that's a whole lot of coin for a motorcycle. Personally, I think you're getting a lot of features, a lot of looks, and a lot of tech, and a very healthy engine for that money. But no matter how you slice it, Ducati is a premium brand, and they command premium prices. There's no way to get around that. So this is an expensive motorcycle. Now, what are the competitors to this thing, right? So it's not really competing with the likes of the R1, the S1000, those kind of things. Ducati has, I don't know, 7 different variations of the V4 now, to whatever you want to pick your flavor and to compete with the leader bikes of the day. It's not really a 600 competitor because it costs a lot more and makes a lot more power. Thinking of stuff like the R6, the 636, you know. I mean, the 636 now comes in at just about 10 grand, which is a smoking hot deal for a bike with that much tech and features. And the R6 is like $12,000, and this thing is 16. So GSXR 750, that's the last kind of middleweight that this thing competes against, when Ducati calls this a super mid, right? And you know, maybe the Daytona 765, but again, this thing makes like 35 more horsepower, and it's not a limited edition bike. So this bike's kind of out there by itself, and I think it's all the better for it. So here's the thing. I think a lot of people approach something like the Ducati V2 and they instantly go, not an R1, not an S1000, doesn't have 200 horsepower, obviously is super slow, right? And that couldn't be farther from the truth, guys. 160 horsepower is like more than enough to have fun on the street, more than enough at your local track day. And honestly, you're not going to go any faster around the track with 45, 50 more horsepower than you would with this thing. To be honest, high horsepower motorcycles become harder and harder to handle as you add more and more power. Something like this is nimble and easy to understand and easy to ride. Even though it has 160 horsepower, because it has all the electronics from the big bike, you know, you can really play with this thing and ride it. So as we go here through this little neighborhood and a couple twisty little bits of road, I love the way this thing feels on the side of the tire. These wide bars and this commanding stance feel absolutely awesome. And that classic Ducati soundtrack. This thing is actually much more than the sum of its parts, I think. And it provides an experience that is balanced. It's not some super high horsepower motorcycle that's about bragging rights. It's not about all outright speed and top end performance. It's actually a very balanced bike, and it's not something that we see very often from manufacturers to take a middleweight or super mid platform like this Ducati and turn it into something that is greater than what it used to be without adding power. A lot of people will say that the best way to get more lap times is to increase the power, but for example, here in Texas under CMRA, most of the tracks that we run here, unless you're talking Circuit of the Americas, which is an absolutely huge racetrack, a 1000cc bike is only about a second faster than a 600. So if you are concerned about lap times, I really wouldn't be with something like this. This thing is just about the true essence of what a sport bike should be and the true experience of what a bike should be. And I think the person who is looking at an R1 or ZX10 for competition, they're not looking at something like this. This bike is completely not a competitor to that, and it's not the point of this thing to run super fast lap times at your local track, even though it will happily do that. See how it handles these bumps here? Really not too bad. Stock suspension, haven't dialed anything in yet. I'm taking this bike out exactly as is. It's just extremely balanced. Everything in here is working in harmony. The controls, the brake feel, the handling, the power. I don't feel like anything is the real star of the show here. All you're getting is a very poised sport bike experience. The one thing I would like to change a little bit is I'm not super fond of Ducati's ride-by-wire system. Something like the R1 does have better throttle feel than the Ducati. I think they're still struggling a little bit when it comes to this throttle. The Hyper Motard that I tested was the same story. It's just this, it's hard to explain, but it doesn't feel quite right to me. I'm used to cable actuated throttles that have a perfect one-to-one relationship with what you do to the throttle and what happens to the throttle body. And right in here, there's just a couple layers of sophistication and computers trying to trick me and tell me what to do. And it just ends up feeling a little bit wonky. But here's the thing about this bike. You know, you can look at it as a $16,500 bike that is way too expensive for what it tries to compete with, or you can look at it as an entry point to owning a Panigale that is actually much more pure than the V4 and a lot easier to ride than the V4. Something that a lot of people don't want to talk about is super high horsepower motorcycles are not fun on the street. They're not. I don't want to have 210 horsepower for street riding. It just ends up being annoying. But this thing still feels fun. I feel like I can play with this thing like a middleweight, but it's got a good amount of grunt. It feels so good side to side, man. This thing's awesome. I love this thing, man. And, you know, say what you will about the V4, I think it's an incredible motorcycle. Makes a ton of horsepower. Big bad V4, you know, fire belching crazy thing. But I think this is the Panigale to get. You're getting the exact same electronics package as the V4. You're getting the classic Ducati V2 soundtrack. This thing has more in line with the classic Ducati sport bike thing than the V4s do. You're getting a bike that is under 20 grand, which for a Ducati sport bike is saying a lot. Honestly, the new V4s cost upwards of 22, 23. V4S is close to like 28,000 if I remember correctly. So 16.5 gets you a bike that most people are going to think is some super expensive Ducati. And look, I'm not saying you should buy a bike just to try to impress people, but you got to admit, if you're looking at something this flashy, you kind of want people to look at you, right? I certainly do. I think it looks absolutely amazing. And it's the type of thing where, you know, if that is important to you, man, this bike succeeds on so many metrics. It's absolutely incredible what they've done with the way this thing looks. It looks like the Big Brother V4, but it comes in a lot cheaper. This is as much sport motorcycle as I would ever want, to be honest. Leader bikes are super fun toys on the track. I absolutely loved ripping around my R1 at the racetrack. But, you know, at the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves and be honest with ourselves, like, are we talented enough to extract performance out of some of these motorcycles? Why is it that every 200 horsepower motorcycle has all these advanced electronics on it? It's to try to keep you in check with it, you know, to try to make sure that you don't yeet yourself off of a cliff with it, right? But man, I am thoroughly impressed with this bike. I really like the way it feels. I really like the way it looks. I think that it is the quintessential Ducati experience to me, and it's so cool that they didn't give up on the V2 platform. I would have been so sad if Ducati had just decided to go completely with the V4s and to forego their twin base sport bikes, because they're still awesome, man. They're still so cool. Now, one thing that a lot of people will talk about the Panigales are their heat, and this one is no different. It's got an exhaust routed right underneath my butt, which I can't really understand why Ducati went and did that with this thing. Why did they route an exhaust pipe right under my butt? Everything is so warm right now near my nuts and my legs and my butt. It's kind of strange that they did that. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. Let's see how the Duck handles. It's a little bit of gravel here. It's equipped with these Rossi 2s, which is a pretty aggressive tire, but still very streetable. You're not talking anything like the Supercorsa SPs or anything like that. Some tighter sections here. Let's keep it lower gear in second and see how the power feels. You can absolutely lug this thing around. It doesn't mind at all. What a cool bike, man. A little bit more gravel here. Don't want to slip our bright, shiny Panigale, do we? So although the Ducati ride-by-wire is a little finicky, I don't love it, to be honest. And the clutch is a little funny on this bike too. One thing I will say Ducati has done a lot better than they used to on their old bikes is the low speed stuff. If anyone's ever ridden any of the classic old air-cooled Ducatis and you know, some of those bigger, beefier, like the 1098s and that kind of bikes, and those kind of bikes rather, you'd know that Ducatis don't love the low speed stuff. But with this new ride-by-wire system and all this other stuff, I'm lugging it up here in second. This thing's totally happy. It's not throwing a big fit. It's not getting all bent out of shape for me. So it feels pretty awesome. I love that they set this thing up with wide bars and a proper geometry at the front end, man. This thing feels awesome. It feels so good. The other thing as well is I think people who don't ride Ducatis or don't want to ride Ducatis are very quick to point out their flaws, and they're very quick to point out that, oh, you know, you could get something better for cheaper. You can always get something better for cheaper, you know? I think now famously the boys over at Revzilla, Zach and Ari, famously showed that you can go and buy yourself a $5,000 K5 and whoop ass on a V4S at the track. You see it all the time, man. The reason you buy a Ducati is not to go super fast around a racetrack. Yes, some people do that, but the reason you buy it is because you just love the brand. You love what they stand for. You like the emotion, the aesthetics of it. I really encourage you guys to not be spec sheet warriors, because if that was the case, if everybody was a spec sheet warrior, and if the fastest, best motorcycle was the best thing in the world and everyone had to ride one, then we'd all be riding around H2s, right? We would all try to go on Craigslist and find the fastest bike for the cheapest price. It didn't matter what it looked like or what we thought about it, because that was the best bike, quote unquote. Let's see how this thing feels in this little section over here. This thing's nimble. It weighs 440, but I really don't feel like it does. I don't really feel like it weighs that much, but it carries its weight super well, to be honest. What a cool bike. Another cool fact about this thing is the vehicle project manager for this motorcycle was actually the same guy that helped out Casey Stoner's 2007 championship winning Ducati. So some good pedigree on this machine, not gonna lie. That was a fun fact that I found out while I was doing some research about this thing. Brakes feel really nice, man, for a sort of non-racy, you know, just Brembo caliper setup. It's not a Stylema, it's not anything super high-end. It feels really good. And that, I think, is another point that I want to drive home for you guys, is that, you know, you don't need Öhlins, you don't need Brembo, you don't need all these super fancy things to make a bike feel awesome. Like, yes, this thing has some really nice componentry on it, but again, it's been set up correctly. That's the thing. I love having a bidirectional quick shifter, man. It makes it so fun. Just a big red fancy scooter. Very cool motorcycle, man. So yeah, is this thing a competition machine? Probably not. It doesn't really compete with anything exactly. Is it some super limited edition bike? Also no. So what exactly is it? Well, I think it's a very pure Ducati riding experience with the V-twin. I think that a lot of people still want this and still like it. Really good top end grunt on this thing, man. Much like every other sport bike I ride, it desperately needs tank grips. It keeps sliding off of this thing. The ergonomics package is not as punishing as you would think. I think the R1 is a lot more punishing to ride than this thing. This thing actually has a pretty cushiony seat. I'm squishing it right now. It actually feels pretty good to go down the road here, and I'm pretty surprised with it, honestly. It feels really good. And it doesn't have a super aggressive angle on it. It's still a sport bike. It's still, you know, extreme, but it could be a lot worse, to be honest. The clever trick that Ducati's done with this V2 is they've made it look more aggressive, but actually a lot easier to ride. These new bikes nowadays, everyone's doing this, and I think it's great. They're not punishing or difficult or weird to ride. They actually are pretty intuitive and pretty easy to get along with. It's not super hard to get your mind around what the V2 wants you to do. It's a pretty easy bike to figure out. So downsides for me so far is when you take off in first, the interaction between clutch and throttle is very peculiar. It's like I can feel it's limiting like the fueling, or the, I don't know, it's not giving me everything that it could, and I feel like I have to rev it a little bit more to kind of get it to do what I need it to, and it seems like the revs always drop when I take off. So kind of strange, but not a huge deal, but that isn't great. What else? The kickstand's a little weird. It's super spindly, and it's kind of difficult to find sometimes when you set it down. But otherwise, this is just a fantastic sport bike riding experience. Alrighty guys, we're now taking the Ducati V2 in the urban environment, goofing around here in downtown, seeing how it feels. Can it handle the mean streets of Austin, Texas? Will it do the thing it needs to do? Is it lurchy? Is it weird? Well, let's see. And also, let's see how many necks we can snap with this very pretty motorcycle. I will say, however many necks you think you're snapping is probably like 80% less necks. No one really cares, honestly. So it appears that the Ducati definitely enjoys second gear cruising more than first gear. I think it becomes kind of confused when it's in first gear and just kind of lurching around. I think it definitely wants to be kind of cruising and chilling in second gear as opposed to first gear kind of stuff. So let's see if we can get it up here in second. Yeah, you can lug it a little bit in second. It definitely seems to like that a little bit more. That's quite nice. Yeah, it's so odd. It doesn't, like, pulling away from first, it feels so funny. It is so nimble from side to side. I love how thin this motorcycle is. I feel like if I have like a little pothole or something, I can just so quickly flick it where I need to flick it. Super agile bike. And it's not even on the most aggressive tires you can find either. It just feels really good. Just carving up downtown pretty easy. And it is warmer on my butt, I'm not gonna lie, but it's gotten better, to be honest. It was a little worse earlier, but that is just part of the game when it comes to Ducati ownership. I have found they're just hot. My desert sled is hot, this bike is hot. Ducatis are hot in more ways than one. They just tend to run a little bit warm, and that's okay. That's why we love them, right? Cannot figure out this first gear clutch situation. What is up with this bike? Stop and go, stop and go. How's it feel? It feels okay. The ergos aren't nearly as punishing as you would think, honestly. It's really not too bad. See here, we got an obstacle. If we just goes. Really agile little bike, man. And it just looks the absolute business. With the dual LEDs, it really harkens back to the original 748. It's got the 2 headlight thing going on. It's so cool, man. And I'm not even really I'm not a super big Ducati snob or anything like that. I do have my desert sled. Their sport bikes have honestly never really done much for me. I rode a V4. I didn't love it, honestly. I found it kind of twitchy and hard to ride. But man, I like this V2 a lot. Like this V2 quite a bit. I think the V2 is best summed up as an antidote to the current horsepower wars. It is the answer to what happens if you make a motorcycle with enough horsepower that also has its suspension sorted, that also has its geometry sorted, that also has all the electronics on it. Like, what happens? What kind of bike do you build? And it turns out that you build a pretty fantastic sport bike. I am not missing the 40 horsepower over the R1 in any capacity. I think this bike is great, and it works super, super well. I'm gonna hang a left over here. That was an illegal maneuver, guys. My bad. Didn't see that wasn't a turn lane. But yeah, it's just, you know, the Ducati is what happens when you focus on fundamentals as opposed to just adding more power. And I find that because it doesn't have a ludicrous hyperspace warping, jumping kind of effect like the R1 has, my mind is less taxed. I don't feel as, you know, tired when I ride this thing. I feel like I can truly enjoy it, which honestly, I don't really feel that way with modern leader bikes. When you jump on them and ride around the street, they just feel extremely over the top, and it feels like you always have to manage them. But this thing still feels really fun and playful, and this is awesome, dude. I really like this bike, man. I didn't think I'd like it as much as I do, but I had a sense when I first started seeing what this motorcycle was about, seeing everything that it was, you know, geared towards, that I'd be very much into it, and I really am. I love this thing. It's awesome. And I'm so glad that I picked it as our expert bike giveaway, because it's sweet, dude. This thing's sweet. I actually really like carving it through downtown. This is awesome. This bike's so cool, dude. And yes, it is just a reskinned 959, but that doesn't mean it's bad. It really doesn't mean it's a bad motorcycle. It just means they took what worked and made it a little bit better over time. And I will say, I've been trying to see if people do look at the Ducati, and they kind of do. It's a hard thing to not look at. It's a very, very attractive motorcycle. It's extremely attractive.
Hey, thanks for watching the video. Why don't you click this one right over here, and you can keep watching some more of your sweet Papa Yam. Maybe this one will have fun memes in it. Maybe it'll be interesting. Maybe I crash a motorcycle. Who can say? Maybe you should click and find out.